Ever get that feeling that your computer's keeping secrets from you? Like something's changed, but you can't quite put your finger on it.
Happens all the time.
Well, today we're going deep into a hidden world that might explain those feelings. The world of NTFS timestamps.
Ah, timestamps.
Ah.
Most people don't realize their files have these little timestamps embedded in them, recording a history of everything.
Like a secret diary for every file, huh?
Exactly.
And today we're going to learn to read that diary. We're diving into an academic paper from Eastern Kentucky University all about NTFS timestamps, especially their role in incident response investigations.
Digital detective work.
Exactly. And you know what? This isn't just for cybersecurity experts. Understanding these timestamps can be really useful for anyone who uses a computer.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Imagine trying to figure out when you last worked on a document, or if someone has been snooping around in your files.
Timestamps can help piece together that puzzle.
Okay, so first, what exactly are NTFS timestamps?
Well, NTFS stands for New Technology File System. It's the standard way Windows organizes and manages all the files on your computer. And every time you create a file or folder, Windows attaches a little bit of extra information to it.
Okay.
Kind of like a label. That's called metadata.
So it's not just the contents of the file itself, but also information about the file.
Right. And timestamps are a key part of that metadata.
Okay.
Think of them like tiny clocks attached to each file, recording key moments in its existence.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. Tell me more about these tiny clocks. What kind of information do they record?
Well, there's a set of timestamps
Oh.
called MACE timestamps.
Mace.
And they've got nothing to do with spice.
Okay.
That would be interesting.
Right.
AC stands for modified, accessed, created, and entry modified.
Okay, break that down for me. What does each timestamp actually tell us?
Let's say you're working on a report in a Word document. Every time you hit save, the modified timestamp gets updated. It tells you the last time the content of that file was changed. Now, if you open a picture just to look at it,
Okay.
that updates the access timestamp.
So access is like peeking into the file, even if you don't actually change anything.
Exactly. And of course, the created timestamp is pretty straightforward. It's like the file's birthday, the moment it was first brought into existence on your computer.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about this entry modified timestamp? That one sounds a bit more mysterious.
Think of it this way. Your hard drive is like a giant library,
Okay.
and the master file table, or MFT, is like the card catalog.
Okay.
It keeps track of where all the books, or in this case, files, are located.
So the MFT is like the master index for my hard drive.
You got it. And the intermodified timestamp records any changes to that file's entry in the card catalog. So if you rename a file or move it to a different folder, that would update the entry modified timestamp.
Interesting. So it's not about changes to the file's content, but about how the file's organized and labeled on my system.
Precisely. And here's where things get even more interesting. There are actually two sets of these MACE timestamps.
Wait.
One stored in the standard information attribute, or C as $,
Okay.
and one in the file name attribute, or file ven.
Two sets of timestamps. Why do we need two?
They serve slightly different purposes. The CSIL timestamps relate to the actual content of the file, like we've been discussing, but the FiveN timestamps are specifically about the file's name and where it lives in the file system, its directory entry.
So CSR is about what's inside the file, and FiveN is about how the file is labeled and where it lives on my computer.
You've got it. And this distinction between CSI and FiveN timestamps is going to be really important when we start talking about how attackers might try to manipulate these timestamps.
Okay, now you've really got me intrigued. It sounds like there's a whole lot more to this story. So what's the catch with these timestamps? Can they always be trusted?
That's the big question. And unfortunately, like a lot of things in the digital world, timestamps can be manipulated.
Manipulated? You mean like forged? How is that even possible?
Think of it like this. Imagine someone breaks into a house and wants to cover their tracks. They might change the clocks on the wall to make it look like they were never there.
Oh.
That's kind of what timestamping is. It's a way of altering timestamps to create a false record of events.
So they're basically creating a digital alibi, but how do they actually do it? Do you need some kind of super hacker skills?
Not necessarily. There are tools out there specifically designed to modify timestamps. The paper actually mentions one called setMace, which lets someone directly change those CSI or timestamps we were talking about.
So with a few clicks, someone could make it look like a file was created or modified at a totally different time?
Exactly. And it's not just about individual files. Think about malware. When malware infects your system, It often drops malicious files onto your hard drive to hide their tracks. Attackers can program the malware to automatically timestamp these files.
So it's like the malware is cleaning up after itself, trying to erase its digital footprints. Sneaky. But hold on, you mentioned earlier that there are two sets of timestamps, 6FI and 5FOs. If they can manipulate 6SS, can't they just do the same thing to 5FA?
It's not quite that simple. Remember how we talked about the MFT being like the library's card catalog?
Yeah.
Well, to change FUDFN timestamps, you need more than just borrowing privileges. You need to be able to get behind the counter and mess with the catalog itself. It's a deeper level of access to the system, something called raw disk access.
Okay, so it's like needing a master key to get into a vault, where those timestamps are stored.
Exactly, but even though it's more difficult, determined attackers have found ways to get around this, and that's where double stomping comes in.
Yeah.
It's a sneaky workaround. That lets them manipulate those harder-to-change FEVSN timestamps.
Double stomping. Okay, now that sounds seriously devious. How does that even work?
Well, they exploit the way Windows updates timestamps. When you move files between folders, it's kind of chain reaction.
Wait, so just moving a file around can change its timestamps? I thought those were supposed to be fixed records.
The contents of the file stay the same,
Yeah.
of course. But remember those Sevisalar and FIMN timestamps.
Right.
When you move a file, Windows uses the Sevisalar timestamps from the old location. To update the FIMN timestamps in the new location, attackers have figured out how to use this to their advantage.
Okay, walk me through it. How do they actually pull this off?
Let's say an attacker wants to hide the true origin of a malicious file. First, they use a tool like setmace to change the Sevisai timestamps
Yeah.
to whatever they want.
So step one is changing the timestamps that are easier to manipulate. Makes sense.
Right. Then they move the file to a new folder, anywhere on the same hard drive. And here's the key. Because of how Windows works, the file's FIFN timestamps in that new location get updated using those altered Sevisai timestamps we just talked about.
So they're using those modified CSIR timestamps as a blueprint to overwrite the FASN timestamps.
Exactly. Then, to cover their tracks even further, they change the CSI dollar timestamps in the new location to something else entirely. This makes it look like the file was created or modified at a completely different time. Finally, they move the file back to its original folder.
Hold on, they move it back. Why all this back and forth?
Because when the file is moved back to its original folder, Windows updates the FUNASIGN timestamps one more time, using the new CSI dollar timestamps as a guide. And guess what? Now the FUNASIGN timestamps perfectly match the altered CSA dollar timestamps. It's like a digital disappearing act.
Wow, so it's like a shell game, moving the file back and forth and manipulating the timestamps along the way until they get the result they want. That's pretty clever, I have to admit, though obviously not in a good way.
It's definitely a devious technique. And it underscores the importance of having skilled investigators who can spot these kinds of manipulations.
Okay, so if attackers can potentially manipulate both sets of timestamps, how can investigators ever be sure they're getting the real story? It seems like we're just taking their word for it.
It's a valid concern, but it's not a hopeless situation. There are ways to fight back against these timestamp shenanigans.
Okay, good. Tell me there's a way to see through these digital illusions.
One of the best defenses is to focus on those FINAVN timestamps, particularly the file name created timestamp. As we've seen, they're harder to manipulate, even with tricks like double stomping.
So even if the CSIR timestamps have been altered, the FUNAVN timestamps might still hold the truth.
Exactly, and by carefully comparing both sets of timestamps, investigators can often find inconsistencies, little red flags that indicate someone's been tampering with the evidence. It's like noticing that the clock on the wall doesn't match the timestamp on a security camera recording. Something's not adding up.
That's a great analogy. So it's all about looking for those little details that don't quite make sense.
Precisely. And this is where the expertise of incident responders really comes in. They know what to look for and how to interpret those subtle clues within the broader context of an investigation.
So it's not just about the timestamps themselves, but about understanding their full story.
You got it.
This is fascinating stuff. Before this deep dive, I never really thought much about timestamps on my files, but now I'm realizing they're like these hidden clues, a secret language telling the story of what's been happening on my computer.
It really is. And while most of us won't ever need to investigate a cybercrime, understanding this hidden language can be beneficial for anyone.
Absolutely. So for those of us who aren't digital detectives, what can we do to protect ourselves from timestamp manipulation? Or at least become more aware of it?
Well, while completely preventing timestamping might be tough, you can definitely make it harder for attackers.
How?
Keeping your operating system and antivirus software up to date is a big one. Those updates often include patches that fix security holes, including the ones that could be exploited for timestamping.
So it's all about staying one step ahead, making sure our systems are as secure as possible.
Exactly. And if you're really curious and want to explore this world of NTFS timestamps further, there are actually tools out there that can help you analyze them, even if you're not a tech whiz. Yeah, we won't get into specifics here, but if you're interested in seeing these hidden timestamps for yourself, there are resources available to guide you.
That's really cool. It's empowering to know we have tools to peek behind the curtain and see what's really going on with our files.
It is. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about how these timestamps work, the better equipped you'll be to spot anything unusual or suspicious.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We've learned about those MCE timestamps, the difference between CSSI and 5N attributes, and how attackers can use tricky techniques like timestamping and double stamping to cover their tracks. It's like a whole digital detective story unfolding right before our eyes.
Absolutely. We also saw how focusing on 5N timestamps, especially file name created, can help investigators see through those manipulations. And by analyzing both sets of timestamps together, they can often spot those little inconsistencies that tell a different story.
Before we wrap up, I have to ask, what's the big takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing they should remember from this deep dive?
I think the most important thing to remember is this. NTFS timestamps are like hidden clues, a valuable source of information, but they're not always foolproof.
Right.
It's crucial to be aware of how they can be manipulated and to understand the importance of careful analysis, especially in digital investigation.
Well said. And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with the thought-provoking question. If these digital timestamps can be altered, how much can we truly trust the digital trails we leave behind? It's something to think about as we navigate our increasingly digital world.
Indeed. It's a question that raises some really important points about authenticity, trust, and the very nature of evidence in the digital age.
This has been an amazing deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and remember those timestamps are telling a story. It's up to us to learn how to listen.